So Restorative Justice at Southeast is a three-tiered program. Um, First, it's culture in classrooms. Then it's bringing students in for conferences and mediations to prevent any sort of violence. And then re-entry circles if a student has to leave the school to make them feel more comfortable.
Tier one is mostly done in our classrooms as we try to build a strong and positive culture community. So what we do is we work on like how do we communicate, especially when it comes down to conflicts in class.
It also includes community events. So we're working with the Southeast Coalition, which is housed down the street in a church, to host events monthly for our scholars and their families. We know that when we bring them together in a setting outside of the classroom, it gives us a chance to bond as a family. Mm-hmm. And restorative justice kind of operates on that principle, is that as a school, we are a family, which means including our community members and parents and guardians.
So when we get to tier two, we're speaking of like, okay, now we're in conflict. Like, how do we address that conflict? What kind of words do we choose? So what we do is when we find our community members that have issues, we try to provide them a space in which they can work that out, because we believe within this community that if given the space, the two individuals can work out their own problems and come to a resolution by just allow them to share their story, the harm that is done, and what they need to make things right and move forward.
So this, what Tier 2 looks like, when a student comes into the Restorative Justice Center, right now we have about half walk-in, half referral by administrator or teacher. When they come in, we'll ask them to fill out a sheet, that's so they can really break down what happened and who was affected by it. So the first few questions ask them, what happened? It just states that objectively. What happened from your perspective? Who was affected by it, and what do you think is needed to make it right? Afterwards, they'll conference with one of us to discuss those questions, and we'll kind of push them. Was there anyone else affected? Is there anything else needed to make it right? And then after that, we'll ask them if they need to talk to that person, and then provide that space. So for a lot of students, what that looks like is if they're frustrated with another student, we then conference with the second student and bring the two together, because we believe that when students are in this space and given that pre-work, they can be the ones to work out the conflict for themselves and decide for themselves what they need.
Tier three is mostly when we speak of our re-entry level, like when students have caused harm in our community and they had been removed. We want to, again, create a space in which we invite them back and ensure that they are welcomed, but also that our community feels comfortable with them being back. So we'll revisit the episode that took place, have people that were involved to share like the harm that was done and again the needs to make things right. And so we hold them to certain obligations to ensure that our community feels good going forward.
And then for our students who unfortunately get charges, there's an opportunity through the Center for Conflict Resolution and the district attorney for them to complete the obligations spoken of and potentially have their charges expunged or dropped. And so that we have scholars who get to graduate without a record, which is the goal at the end of the day, to make sure our students are ready to go into the next part of their lives without any sort of strike against them.
I have had a circle in a restorative justice, and I had a conflict with someone, and it didn't go as planned. At first, I was just like, I don't think I want to go because I don't think it's going to help. But when you actually sit down and talk about like how you felt, how the other person felt, it actually helps everybody out, because now you know like, oh, I did this wrong, and they know like, oh, I did this wrong, so this is what we need to do to make it right.
A lot of more kids will interact with each other. You know, they won't feel as much as they need to handle things by taking it to straight violence or taking it out of school.
With people not going, like, talking to each other, they will usually go fight outside school or go shoot and stuff like that. But coming together, it, like, brings them more, I don't know, like, they come together and talk it out instead of physically fighting and get suspended and going to jail. They're having a court date and stuff like that.
With the program expanding, I feel like it would be less fights and less conflict between students, because when you're in the restorative justice circle, everybody's feelings get out. So you will know how everybody feels. And if you know how everybody feels, you would make an agreement to not like do whatever makes them feel uncomfortable.
you don't always have to feel like you need to stand up. You can walk away from a situation. Like if you was to talk, you could talk to somebody about your problems, and there's someone that actually would be there to listen. I've had a friend that actually was in a fight and that stopped. I mean, she was on the verge of getting kicked out of school, and she had to sit down with the other person, and they came to an agreement to drop it. And I think I respected that because now I get to see her walk the stage.
Restorative justice is a safe place. Your business don't get out there like that. Like I thought my business, like everybody in school was gonna know that I was gonna fight her and her and her, but it don't get out there like that. It stays in the classroom, and we have an agreement for people not to tell. So it's just low key, and you got to keep it low key. That's the main thing about restorative justice. We don't want no physical fights. We want just to talk it out.
I think it can teach people how to communicate more because in the future, as we grow up to be adults, we got to handle things more maturely than we do now in high school. We're still learning, we're still growing, but if we learn how to communicate now, we can know how to communicate better, during jobs with people, getting conflicts with your boss. It'll just be much better.